Like about 500,000 other people, I've been playing a fair bit of Balatro lately, the incredibly hard to explain to other people poker-based deck builder, and its massive success illustrates the kind of impact a truly original gameplay idea can have. The old saying is true: build a better mousetrap than your neighbour and the world will beat a path to your door, except for the parts of it that like mice, I suppose. But it's very easy for us snobby media types to say, come up with new gameplay ideas. It's a lot harder to actually do that. For example, I've been concerned that melee combat mechanics in video games are basically done innovating. Every single game now, it's light attack, heavy attack, dodge, and parry. Even the shooters have parry now. I don't know what the fuck a parry bullet is, or how it differs from the regular kind, and apparently Suicide Squad didn't feel like explaining. So I was trying to think of some interesting new idea for a core combat gameplay thread. Specifically, I wanted to think of something I'd be good at. When combat mechanics come down to having the faster reflexes or the better strategic planning ability, I tend to suck harder the older I get. But what I am really good at is anagrams. It's so disappointing that hardly anyone plays Battle Royale anymore, because I could punish at that. I played this on stream once or twice and inevitably got stream sniped, but I'd just take them apart anyway. It was like ants trying to stream snipe a trapdoor spider. So I was envisioning an idea for a melee combat system where encroaching enemies have seemingly random letters floating over their heads, each tied to a specific button on the controller, and you damage and push enemies back by pressing the buttons in an order that spells out words, longer words doing more damage. So it's anagrams crossed with a sort of on-the-fly combo system. There's a lot you could do to min-max for your personal vocabulary strengths too, like equip a weapon that does double damage when you spell out words relating to animals, or to toilet-related slang. That'd be something I'd absolutely slaughter at, because it rewards the player who can solve anagrams the fastest. It'd make up for every time I got the pangram in the spelling bee on the New York Times app and looked around to see nobody there to admire my cleverness. But then I realised that if I wanted to prototype this out, I'd need to program a game with a list of every single word in the English language. Maybe there's scripts and databases I can download somewhere to make that easier, but I'd still need to go through and flag all the words that are animal and toilet related. I powerfully couldn't be asked to do that, so I thought, okay, what if it wasn't about language? It'd be a pain in the ass to translate anyway. What if it was maths equations rather than anagrams? So there'd be numbers and symbols floating around the enemies, and you'd have to arrange them in the right order to make valid equations, like 2 + 4 = 6. But wait, that'd be much less flexible than anagrams in terms of being able to do more damage with longer entries. And besides, maths? What, are we an educational game now? Nobody thinks maths is fun. Nobody'd want to be trapped in conversation with at a party anyway. Alright then, I thought, let's strip numbers and language out of it and make it completely universal, like how Rainbow Billy used colours and shapes in place of numbers. So there'd be a bunch of coloured shapes floating around the enemy and you'd have a list of combinations that translated into different attacks. No. Now we've just reinvented fighting game inputs. Or possibly Guitar Hero. You see how hard this is, and it's even harder to come up with an interesting new combat system if you overthink it. Overthink any game mechanic and most of them will eventually boil back down to press the correct button next to the dude. Ideas like Balatro don't come from sitting down and thinking about it. It's a single spark of genius that came by taking an established game mechanic and reframing it through a unique perspective, rather than iterating or building upon it. We start with card-based deck building, such as in Slay the Spire or Marvel's Snap, but where such games use cards to represent fantasy battles and are drenched in appropriate theming, Balatro takes the standard mechanics of a deck builder and applies it back to card games in the classical sense. An act spiritually akin to strapping a rocket booster to a donkey, which you'd have to admit would be spectacular to watch, however the donkey might feel about it. It's the kind of innovation that seems obvious in retrospect, and after it does gangbusters, causes a lot of people to kick themselves for not having thought of it first. It makes me wonder what other new concepts we could come up with by applying the same thinking. Like Dungeons & Dragons uses D20s to represent fantasy battles, let's make a version of Yahtzee with D20s and deck builder elements, or expand upon the idea of fantasy versions of casino games. Soccer involves kicking a little white ball around, and on that level at least is spiritually akin to roulette. Imagine a soccer game on a giant roulette wheel. So you think you're kicking towards your goal, but then whoops, the wheel spins and now it's the other team's goal. I just made those up, but then I did a search and there is indeed a Balatro-inspired Yahtzee game on Steam, slated for a Q4 release, called Pimp My Dice, which is about as clever a title as could be expected. So yeah, the vultures are going to be circling. I'm glad Balatro has announced they're doing a mobile version, because I'm sure there's going to be about 50 knockoffs of it in mobile by the time I finish my next Blink. But I wouldn't even be mad. It'd be like contentedly watching seagulls fight over my discarded sandwich crust. I'm not bothered because I've already gotten what I wanted out of the sandwich. The satisfaction of knowing that indie games are still the trendsetters, the starting point, the very beating heart of this industry. Because to zero back in on the point I'm trying to make, indie games are really the only place where innovation can happen. It's easy to be pessimistic about the future of video games if you only pay attention to all the layoffs and cuts we've been seeing lately in what I'm increasingly hesitant to call the AAA industry. I've heard gloomy voices talking about being in the midst of another video game crash and everything is ruined forever, but we've always known the big money industry as it's been in the last few years is unsustainable. The bubble had to burst sometime, and the reason for that that is because AAA development overthinks too much. How can it not overthink when you have 100+ dudes on the development team all thinking about stuff and trying to look busy? So on the off chance that an original idea does come up, it's drowned by obligations to monetize and push the spectacular graphics and make sure to include gear grinding so the armor polishing department can have something to do. I really enjoyed the indie game Pacific Drive recently, and what I liked about it is that it focuses on driving and doesn't really have combat. Do you think that would still be the case if, say, Ubisoft were making it? I doubt it. They'd probably copy-paste their usual Far Cry first-person game template, do a quick find and replace, and end up having guns just because the gun department made a whole bunch and nobody specifically told them not to. Even Ubisoft's recent lower-scoped things like Prince of Persia and Skull and Bones couldn't resist the urge to pump in some RPG or crafting bullshit, because that's easier than explaining to the C-suite that the game works perfectly well without it. Video games aren't going to crash or die anytime soon, don't you worry about that. They might have to wean themselves off their addiction to enormous amounts of scope and money, but Balatro should illustrate that video games will be just fine as long as mad people are still having mad ideas. Nothing's going to get in the way of that, except perhaps Lexapro.
Are you a fan of Alien, The Thing, or True Detective Night Country? Want a chilling story to listen to on those cold winter nights? Then you need to tune into The White Vault, a fully voiced horror fiction podcast from the folks at Fool and Scholar Productions. The award-winning found-footage show centers around an international rescue and repair team sent to discover the source of a mysterious signal at a remote Arctic research station. The weather takes a turn for the worse, the team becomes trapped, and you guessed it, spookies ensue. Check out The White Vault, available for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now and discover the unimaginable horrors that await beneath the ice.